What would you do if a billionaire offered to erase your entire debt? But only if you gave him a child and nothing more. No love, no strings, just a contract. But what happens when the one thing neither of them planned was falling in love? Stay until the end, because this isn't just a love story. It's a storm of betrayal, redemption, and the most unexpected ending you'll never see coming. Rain fell over Tribeca like a quiet confession, each droplet streaking down the windows of the velvet note with a rhythm too steady to ignore. Inside, the jazz bar, dim lights cast warm shadows across polished mahogany tables, and the music, low, brassy nostalgic, swirled in the air like smoke. It was a place meant for stories, for endings, and sometimes for new beginnings disguised as mistakes. Clara. Morgan sat at the far end of the bar, shoulders hunched under the weight of a damp trench coat and 1,000 silent regrets. Her fingers toyed with a half-empty glass of whiskey sour, ice cubes clinking as they surrendered to the warmth. She hadn't meant to end up here, but somehow, after the latest call from the debt collector, after ignoring her landlord's third notice, and after remembering that her mother's name was still attached to that final hospital bill, this was where her feet took her. She had stopped checking her bank balance weeks ago. What difference would it make? $980,000. That was the number, written on yellow legal paper, haunting her dreams, and now scrawled on the back of a napkin she'd half torn from the bar. Clara wasn't the type to wallow. She had always figured things out. But this felt different, like drowning in open air. Across the room, a man watched her in silence. Sebastian Reed didn't usually come to places like this. It wasn't that he was above it, though the private driver, the tailored overcoat, and the silent security detail outside might suggest otherwise. He simply didn't need distractions. But tonight, the silence of his penthouse had become intolerable. The kind that whispered too loudly, that made even his success feel hollow. He noticed her before she noticed him. The way her shoulders slumped, but her jaw remained tight. The way she sipped her drink with deliberate control, even as her other hand scribbled something on a napkin with barely concealed panic. She was stunning, yes, but not in the effortless, glossy kind of way the women at his galas always were. She was real, haunted, defiant. Sebastian didn't believe in fate. He believed in numbers, in patterns, in outcomes that could be predicted and controlled. But something about her, about the weariness in her eyes and the tremble she refused to show, called to him in a way he didn't understand. "You're not good at keeping secrets," he said calmly, voice low enough that it only reached her ears. Clara turned, startled. Her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me? You've been whispering your debt to your drink for 10 minutes. She blinked, then laughed, a dry, bitter sound that had no joy in it. "Well, Mr. Eavesdropper, congratulations. You've unlocked the first act of tonight's tragic comedy." Sebastian offered no smile, only a slight tilt of his head. "Why?" Clara frowned. "Why what? Why do you owe that much money?" She looked him over then, realizing that his suit cost more than her entire wardrobe and his expression was carved from stone. She should have been offended, should have walked away. But something about his eyes stopped her, cool and still, like the eye of a storm. "My mother was sick, cancer, 5 years of fighting it. She lost. I inherited the bills." "And no one to help?" Clara snorted. "Help? I'm a freelance baker. Who do you think bails people like me out?" Sebastian reached into his coat and pulled out a sleek black card. He didn't hand it to her yet, just set it on the bar between them like a challenge. "I'll pay your debt." Clara stared at the card, then at him. "You must be drunker than me." "I'm not drunk." "Well, then you're insane." "Possibly," he said evenly. "But I'm also very serious." "What's the catch?" Her voice sharpened, a shield rising. "People like you don't offer charity. Ever." Sebastian's gaze didn't flinch. "You'll have my child." Silence swallowed the air between them. Clara blinked once, twice, as if she hadn't heard him correctly. "You mean, like adoption?" she asked slowly, already knowing the answer. "No, you will carry and give birth to my biological child, and in exchange I'll clear your entire debt." Her laugh this time was more disbelief than humor. "You think this is some kind of movie? It's a contract. I'm not a surrogate, I'm not desperate." "You are," he said softly, not unkindly. "But you're also proud. That's why you're still here, drinking instead of begging." Clara looked down at her glass, then at the napkin she had scribbled on, then at the man who had just offered her the most absurd, indecent proposal she'd ever heard, and somehow made it sound like a business pitch. Do I at least get time to think about this nightmare? Sebastian pushed the card toward her. 3 days. The offer expires after that. She picked up the card. It was heavier than it looked. No company name. Just an address. Penthouse, 157. Midtown. Why me? She asked quietly, almost to herself. He stood buttoning his coat. Because you haven't asked for anything. And because something tells me you'd make a better mother than most women I've ever met. With that, he turned and walked into the storm outside, leaving her with a heart pounding in her chest, and a question that refused to leave her. Was this a lifeline or another chain? That night, Clara didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling of her apartment, clutching the black card in her hand as if it might whisper an answer. She knew she should throw it away, burn it, laugh about it later, but she didn't. Because beneath the insult and insanity, there was an unmistakable truth. For the first time in a long while, someone had offered her a way out, and maybe, just maybe, that meant something. 3 days later, Clara Morgan stood in front of a towering glass skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan, her heart thudding beneath her coat. 157 shimmered in the morning light like a needle piercing the sky, sharp and impenetrable. She looked up at the building, then down at the black card in her hand. The name Sebastian Reed was embossed in silver, nothing else. No phone number, no instructions. Just the name of a man who had made her a proposition that no rational person should accept. And yet here she was. She had thought of 100 reasons to walk away. Pride, morality, fear. But each one was outmatched by a single truth. She had no other options. The bills didn't disappear just because she hated them. The landlord wouldn't wait just because she needed time. And somewhere inside her, past all the cynicism and anger, there was a whisper that maybe, just maybe, this could be something more than a transaction. Maybe this was survival. The elevator ride to the penthouse was silent and swift, the kind that made your stomach drop and your thoughts race. When the door slid open, she stepped into a world unlike anything she'd ever seen. The space was vast, all glass and steel and marble, flooded with light. It was beautiful, in the same way winter can be beautiful, cold, still, almost untouchable. Sebastian Reed stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, his posture relaxed yet guarded. He wore a charcoal grey sweater, sleeves pushed up to reveal forearms that looked sculpted more by discipline than vanity. When he turned to face her, his expression was unreadable. Controlled. "You came," he said, voice even. Clara held her chin high, though her knees felt like jelly. "I told myself I wouldn't. But you did. I'm not agreeing to anything yet. I wouldn't expect you to." He motioned for her to follow him toward a long, sleek dining table where a folder rested. Clara glanced at it, then at him. She didn't sit. Sebastian opened the folder and pushed it toward her. "This is the agreement. It outlines every part of the arrangement. Financial, medical, legal." She opened the folder cautiously. It was all there in print. The debt payoff, the timeline, the expectation of cohabitation, the clear stipulation that there would be no romantic involvement, no emotional entanglements. It was clinical, distant, too clean for something so profoundly intimate. She swallowed hard. This doesn't feel real. It's not meant to feel anything. It's a solution. Maybe that's the problem, she said softly. You think people are problems to be solved. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Do you want to add a clause? Yes, she replied, surprising even herself. 1. You'll make me feel like a person, not a contract. He didn't blink. That wasn't in the original negotiation. Well, it is now. A long silence stretched between them. Then Sebastian nodded once and extended a pen. Clara stared at it. Her hand hovered, uncertain. You're sure about this? She asked. No, he admitted, but I'm certain about you. She signed. The pen made no noise, no ceremony. But as the ink dried, something shifted. The air between them, once rigid, now hummed with something unspoken. She moved in the next day. Her suitcase looked absurdly out of place against the backdrop of clean angles and neutral tones. She brought with her a duffel bag filled with mismatched mugs, a few framed photos, and a tangle of scarves that clashed with everything. And yet, as she unpacked, Clara couldn't help but feel that she wasn't just moving into a new space. She was crossing a threshold into a life she didn't recognize. Sebastian gave her the guest bedroom, which was larger than her entire apartment. It had a private bathroom, a closet the size of a boutique, and windows that overlooked Central Park. Still, she placed a small potted plant on the sill to make it hers, a spearmint she'd nursed back to life after finding it half dead at a street market. It seemed appropriate. Their first few days under the same roof passed quietly. Sebastian left early in the mornings and returned late, always in perfect attire, always composed. Clara didn't ask what he did with his time. She didn't need to. The apartment itself spoke volumes about the man. Every surface spotless, every item in its place. A life of control, isolation. She, by contrast, was chaos. She cooked because it soothed her. Stirring, tasting, improvising, it made her feel human. The first time she filled the kitchen with the scent of garlic and rosemary, Sebastian walked in, froze in the doorway, and stared as if she'd vandalized a sacred space. "I assume this is not part of the agreement," he said. "No," she replied cheerfully. "It's part of mine." She slid a plate of lemon butter chicken toward him. He hesitated. "I don't usually eat home-cooked meals," he said, as if confessing a sin. "Well," Clara smiled. "Now you do." He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, didn't comment. The next night, she found him in the kitchen again, watching as she rolled out dough for cinnamon rolls. He didn't ask questions, didn't interrupt, just stood there, hands in pockets, as the apartment slowly began to smell like sugar and heat and something close to comfort. One evening, as she sat curled up in the living room reading, Sebastian returned earlier than usual. Without a word, he handed her a small white box. She looked at him suspiciously. "What is it?" "Your favorite prenatal vitamins. I saw your bottle was almost empty." Clara opened the box. Her throat tightened. "You remembered?" "I remember everything," he said quietly. And for the first time, she believed he wasn't just building a transaction. He was building something else. Something neither of them had the words for yet. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Clara didn't feel like a woman who had sold her body for freedom. She felt like someone standing at the edge of something terrifyingly tender. And as much as she wanted to fight it, the truth bloomed quietly in her chest. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was becoming something else. Something dangerously close to hope. The morning Clara found out she was pregnant was not a dramatic affair. There were no gasps, no sudden tears, just silence. She sat alone on the edge of the bathroom tub, staring at the pink lines on the plastic stick resting on the counter like a verdict. She had taken 2 tests just to be sure, and now they sat beside each other, identical in their quiet confirmation. The realization didn't hit her like a wave. It crept in slowly, like fog curling under the door. She placed a hand on her stomach, though there was no change yet, no sign. And yet something felt different. Not physical, not even emotional. More like a thread had been pulled taut inside her, binding her to something that hadn't existed yesterday. She didn't tell Sebastian right away. Instead, she walked out of the bathroom and into the morning, brewed her usual tea and stood by the kitchen window, watching the city buzz far below. The penthouse felt too big that day, too quiet. The kind of silence that didn't just hold space, but demanded you fill it with meaning. Sebastian returned from a board meeting just after noon. He looked the same as he always did, polished, composed, a man who wore restraint like armor. But when his eyes landed on her, something flickered. "You're up early," he said. "I have news," she replied simply. He set down his briefcase and walked over, keeping a careful distance. "Go on." "I'm pregnant." There was a long pause. His gaze didn't change, but his fingers curled slightly at his sides. Clara watched him closely, expecting a sigh, a nod, maybe even relief. Instead, she saw hesitation. Not rejection. Not fear. Just a deep, quiet calculation, as if he were trying to adjust the gears of a machine now faced with a variable it hadn't planned to feel. "I see," he said, his voice low. "Are you all right?" She tilted her head. "I think so." "You're sure?" 2 tests. Same result. He nodded slowly, as though trying to process not just the information but the implications. Clara could tell he had prepared for this moment, had imagined it, probably even rehearsed it, but reality had a way of bending the script. "We'll book an appointment. The best care. Whatever you need," he said. She smiled faintly. "That's very noble of you." "I don't do noble," he replied. "I do necessary." They didn't speak of it again that day. But that night, as Clara lay awake in bed, she heard something unfamiliar from the hallway. Footsteps pacing back and forth, measured, tense. She didn't open her door, but she knew it was him. A man who had spent his life mastering control, now walking off a feeling he couldn't name. As the weeks passed, subtle changes took root. Clara's morning sickness was brutal at first, but she managed it with crackers, peppermint tea, and sheer willpower. Sebastian, to his credit, began adjusting in his own way. He started coming home earlier, leaving the door to his office ajar, hovering near the kitchen more often when she cooked. He never asked how she felt, but he noticed the little things. When she stopped eating eggs because the smell turned her stomach, they disappeared from the fridge. When she said she missed cinnamon toast from a diner back in Brooklyn, he had 3 different brands delivered the next morning. He still wasn't warm, but he was present. One Saturday afternoon, Clara was curled up on the living room couch, sketching in her notebook. It had been years since she'd drawn anything, but now that her body was creating something, her hands needed to do the same. She was mid-outline of a small bakery storefront when Sebastian entered the room with an envelope. He held it out almost stiffly. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." Inside was a letter from a private art studio in Soho. A space had been reserved in her name for a month-long residency. No strings attached. "I thought you might want to create," he said. Clara stared at the paper, then at him. "You're giving me studio time?" "You gave me garlic bread," he replied dryly. She laughed, a genuine sound, and for the first time Sebastian didn't just smirk. He smiled. It was small, fleeting, but it cracked the surface of the man he showed to the world. From that day on, something began to shift between them. It wasn't romantic, at least not in the conventional sense. There were no flowers, no declarations, but there was attention, thoughtfulness, shared silences that no longer felt heavy, but comfortable. She taught him how to make pancakes one rainy morning. He insisted on measuring everything precisely. She added a dash of cinnamon without asking, just to watch him flinch. "You're impossible," he muttered. "And you're wound tighter than my old toaster," she grinned. They ate in silence, but when she reached for another pancake and found it missing, she saw the smallest of crumbs at the corner of his mouth. "Thief. Efficiency," he said. One evening, she woke up to find him sitting in the kitchen at 3 a.m. reading an article on infant sleep cycles. He looked exhausted, though he hadn't touched the baby yet. She leaned in the doorway, arms crossed over her growing belly. "You planning to co-sleep with a spreadsheet?" she asked. "It's called preparation. It's called overthinking." He didn't argue. She walked over, poured them both a glass of water, and sat across from him. They didn't speak, but she noticed that when he stood to leave, he lingered in the doorway for a moment too long, as if he wasn't ready for the conversation to end. By the time Clara reached her 4th month, the penthouse no longer felt like a museum. There were signs of life now. A throw blanket here, a stack of sketchbooks on the coffee table, the scent of vanilla candles she kept lighting in the evenings. Sebastian said nothing about the changes, but he stopped rearranging them, which was its own form of approval. One night, Clara felt the first flutter, a tiny movement, like a butterfly trapped beneath her ribs. She gasped, placing a hand on her stomach wide-eyed. Sebastian looked up from across the room, concern etched in his brow. "What is it?" "She moved," Clara whispered. "The baby." He didn't respond right away. Then he crossed the room, hesitant, and sat beside her. "Here," she said, taking his hand and guiding it to her belly. He stilled. They waited. Then just once the baby kicked. Sebastian inhaled sharply. His fingers twitched. "That was her," Clara murmured. He didn't speak. But when she looked at him, she saw something raw flicker in his eyes. Not fear, not calculation, wonder. And in that moment, with the city glowing quietly behind them, Clara knew, whatever they were becoming, it was real. Messy, undefined, improbable, but real. And that was more than enough for now. The silence returned before Clara even realized it was happening. It began in small, almost invisible ways. The quiet pause after meals where laughter used to live. The way Sebastian lingered less in the kitchen, stopped asking her how her drawings were going or commenting on the smell of cinnamon that filled the penthouse each morning. It wasn't an argument that started it. Not a misunderstanding or a moment of anger. It was something colder, detachment, and it crept in like a tide. She had noticed he had been taking more calls than usual. His office door, often left cracked open, was now firmly shut most days. When she passed by, she could hear the low cadence of his voice, clipped and focused, as if whatever was happening on the other side of that door couldn't risk the softness of her presence interrupting it. She didn't want to be suspicious, but it was harder not to be, especially as the distance between them seemed to widen while her belly swelled, the baby growing stronger and more present with each passing day. Clara tried to ignore it. She told herself it was work, business. His world didn't slow down for anything, not even this, whatever this had become. Then one afternoon, while retrieving a bottle of water from the kitchen, she passed his office just as he spoke words that stopped her cold. "Yes, I'll transfer the remaining amount after the birth. She'll be free to go. That's what we agreed. No loose ends." She didn't move, didn't breathe. I don't think she suspects. She's cooperative, quiet. And when it's over, she'll have what she needs, and I'll have what I wanted. That was always the plan. Clara stepped away before she heard any more. She didn't want to hear more. She made her way back to the couch like someone underwater, each step heavy and surreal. She sat down, placed both hands on her belly, and stared at the city lights through the massive glass windows. Her heart beat steadily, but it felt hollow. So that was all she was. A contract, a vessel, a neat transaction. Everything. The smiles, the way he listened when she spoke about her mother, the way he touched her stomach the night the baby kicked, none of it had been real. She had let herself believe he was changing, that something fragile had grown between them beyond paper and signatures, but she was wrong. And the worst part wasn't that he didn't love her. It was that he had made her believe just for a moment that maybe he could. That night she said nothing. When Sebastian emerged from his office, loosening his tie and asking if there was dinner, she nodded and set the table, her movements fluid, detached. She didn't confront him. She didn't scream or throw the contract in his face. That would have been easier, cleaner. Instead, she simply began to disappear. The next morning, she rose early and left the pancakes on the counter instead of waiting for him to sit with her. She skipped the smiley face sticker she usually left on his laptop when he wasn't looking. She no longer filled the room with music or chatter while she painted. She stopped trying. Sebastian noticed, but not all at once. He felt it in the stillness of the apartment, in the way the air shifted around him. He felt it in the silence of her footsteps, in the absence of her humming, the scent of her tea fading earlier in the morning than usual. And slowly, as the pattern settled in, he began to feel something he didn't recognize right away. Unease. On the third day, he came home to find Clara curled on the orange couch, her sketchbook closed beside her, a plate of untouched food on the table. She didn't look up when he entered. Didn't ask about his day. "You've been quiet," he said. She glanced at him. "I thought you liked quiet," he frowned. "Not this kind." "What kind is this?" she asked, her voice almost too soft. "I don't know, but it doesn't feel right." Clara stared at him for a long moment, then looked away. "Our contract's almost done," she said. "You'll have what you want soon." His jaw tightened. "Is that what you think I care about?" "It's what you said. When?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stood, pressing one hand against her lower back, the other on the curve of her belly. "It doesn't matter." "Clara, I heard you," she whispered. His breath caught. "I heard you talking to your lawyer. After the birth, you said, a clean break, no attachments. You'd pay me to disappear." The truth hung between them like smoke. Sebastian opened his mouth, but no words came out. "I thought," she continued, her voice cracking, "I thought we were becoming something. I thought you meant the pancakes, the mint plant, the way you looked at me when she kicked. But I guess I was just convenient." "That's not—" "Don't lie to me," she said, tears brimming. "Don't make it worse by pretending it was more than it was." Sebastian crossed the room in 2 strides, but when he reached for her, she stepped back. "I let you in," she said, "and that's on me. I should have known better." His eyes searched hers, filled with something desperate, unfamiliar. "I never wanted to hurt you." "No," she said quietly. "You just didn't want to feel anything. And now you don't have to." She walked past him and disappeared into her room, closing the door without a sound. Sebastian stood there, frozen. He had faced down the most ruthless executives in boardrooms around the world. He had dismantled companies, cut through lies and promises, always with surgical precision. But he had no blueprint for this, for regret, for losing something real without realizing he had it in the first place. He sat at the dining table long after she had gone to sleep. He stared at the half-empty plate of pasta she'd made, now cold and congealed. The contract sat folded in the drawer nearby. Still valid, still binding, but it had never meant less than it did now. He had told himself he could control everything, that emotions were liabilities, that if he planned every detail, no one could ever leave him again. But Clara wasn't something he could negotiate. She was a woman who had let herself believe in him, and he had let her down. For the first time in years, Sebastian Reed didn't have an answer, only the sound of silence and the ache of everything he hadn't said. It rained for 3 days after Clara stopped speaking to Sebastian. Outside the penthouse, the city blurred behind sheets of water, the skyline lost in a haze that mirrored the quiet weight hanging between them. Inside, everything had changed. The light in Clara's eyes was gone. Her voice, once the vibrant thread that pulled life into this cold, angular world, had fallen into silence. She moved gently, slowly, her presence more like a shadow than the spark she had once been. Sebastian noticed immediately, of course. He was a man who lived by routine and subtle signs. He had made a fortune on reading markets before they shifted, sensing change in whispers before they became storms. But he had not been prepared for the storm she carried now. He had not expected her retreat to hurt in the places he had always claimed were numb. He wanted to fix it, but he didn't know how. The morning she placed a plate of pesto pasta on the dining table without a word, he sat down and stared at it. She didn't wait for him to taste it like she used to, didn't lean over with that teasing grin, didn't ask him to rate her cooking with that sarcastic edge. She just walked away, curling up on the orange beanbag by the window, one hand resting on her belly, eyes distant. He didn't touch the food. Instead, he watched her. She was right there, just a few steps away, and yet he had never felt so far from her. He had spent his life building distance between himself and the world, and now, for the first time, he wished he knew how to cross it. Later that night, he stood outside her door, knuckles raised to knock, and hesitated. It was the simplest thing. Just a knock, just a few words, but something inside him coiled back. He was afraid. Not of her anger, not even of her disappointment, but of what he might have broken that couldn't be repaired. He didn't knock. But the next morning, he found her, sitting alone in the kitchen, the morning light catching in her hair. He poured a glass of water and leaned against the counter, watching her in silence until she finally looked up. "You've been quiet," he said. Clara didn't answer at first. She just studied him with tired eyes. "I thought you liked quiet," she said eventually, her voice soft but laced with something sharp underneath. Sebastian set the glass down and stepped closer. "Not this kind." Clara raised her eyebrows. "This kind is what you planned for, isn't it? Clean, distant, easy to walk away from." He winced. "Clara, I heard you, Sebastian." Her voice broke on his name. "I heard everything you said to your lawyer. About the extra payment, about the clean exit, about me not suspecting." He felt something heavy settle in his chest, heavier than guilt, heavier than regret. It was shame. "I said that before I realized how much had changed," he said, forcing the words out. "Before I realized how much you meant to me." "You don't get to rewrite the story now," she said, folding her arms protectively around her belly. "Not after everything." Sebastian closed the distance between them, but he didn't reach for her. Not yet. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I thought if I kept it transactional, no one could get hurt." Clara let out a short, bitter laugh. "And how's that working out for you?" "I made a mistake." "A mistake?" she repeated, voice rising. "You let me fall for you, Sebastian. You let me believe this was more than a deal. You looked at me like I mattered. You touched my belly like it meant something. You made me think we were becoming a family, and all the while you were planning to pay me to disappear." "I wasn't planning it anymore," he said quickly. "I hadn't called the lawyer back. I hadn't sent anything. I was afraid." "Of what?" "Of losing control." Clara shook her head, her eyes filled with pain. "You never had control, Sebastian. Not over this. Not over me. Not over her." He looked at her then, really. Looked at her and realized how wrong he'd been. Clara wasn't just strong. She was brave in ways he couldn't understand. She had given everything. Her body, her trust, her heart, while he had hidden behind contracts and logic. He took a slow breath, then finally stepped closer and reached for her hand. "I don't want a clean break," he said quietly. "I want a a messy, imperfect, terrifying life with you and our daughter. I want to make pancakes that fall apart. I want to argue about what kind of music she listens to. I want to be the man you can trust again." Clara stared at him, unmoving. Her lips trembled, but she didn't speak. "I'm not good at love," he continued. "I wasn't raised to understand it. But when you came into my life, everything started to change. I started to change." Finally, Clara blinked and tears spilled over. Not from sadness, not from anger, but from something older, grief, hope, and the fear that maybe this time it could be different. "I wanted you to mean it," she whispered. "I wanted it so badly." "I do," he said. "I mean every word." She stood there for a long moment, caught in that space between forgiveness and fear. Then slowly she placed his hand on her belly again. "She's kicking," she murmured. He felt it, that tiny, fluttering pulse of life. And he looked at Clara, eyes filled with something raw and true. "I want to be there," he said. "For every kick, every cry, every morning." Clara didn't say yes, not with words, but she didn't pull away, and that was enough. They stood there in the middle of the kitchen, the rain soft against the windows, and for the first time the silence between them didn't hurt. It healed. The day Clara went into labor began quietly. A pale morning sun peeked through the Manhattan skyline, casting golden lines across the penthouse floor. She woke earlier than usual, her body feeling heavy, her breath uneven, as though something inside her had already begun to shift. She didn't panic. She just sat on the edge of the bed and whispered her daughter's name into the stillness. Hope. Then she reached for her hospital bag and laid it on the floor next to her, waiting. Sebastian came into the room a few minutes later, half-dressed, and holding 2 mugs of peppermint tea. He paused in the doorway the moment he saw her face. "What's wrong?" he asked. She looked up at him, calm but pale. "She's coming." The mug slipped slightly in his hand. "Now?" Clara nodded. "Now." The next few hours unfolded in a blur of motion. Sebastian, once the master of order and control, couldn't find his keys. He dropped the car fob twice and put his jacket on inside out. Clara, between contractions, laughed so hard in the elevator that she had to grip the railing for balance. "You're the one falling apart," she teased breathlessly. "And I'm the one doing all the work." By the time they reached the hospital, the laughter had given way to sharp pain and quiet breathing exercises. Sebastian never left her side. He held her hand through every contraction, wiping her forehead, murmuring words of encouragement he never thought he'd know how to say. His world, once built on deadlines and contracts, was now reduced to one room, one woman, and the sound of her ragged breath as she brought life into the world. 8 hours passed. When Hope was born, the room filled with the raw sacred sound of a new cry. Clara collapsed back onto the pillows, exhausted, her arms trembling as the nurse laid the baby against her chest. Hope's skin was pink and wrinkled, her eyes blinking slowly as if trying to understand the light. Clara couldn't. "Stop crying. She's beautiful," she whispered. Sebastian stood frozen. His entire body ached from tension, but when he stepped forward and looked down at his daughter for the first time, something inside him broke. Not in a way that shattered, but in a way that opened. He had never held a baby before. But when the nurse gently placed her into his arms, he knew exactly how to cradle her. Hope's tiny fingers curled around one of his, instinctively trusting. He looked at Clara, his voice rough. "She looks like you." Clara smiled weakly, brushing tears from her cheeks. "Then she's already better than both of us." They brought Hope home 3 days later. The penthouse, once a monument to silence and structure, had become something else entirely. There were diapers on the counter, burp cloths on the sofa, and a new bassinet near the window where light poured in each morning. Clara walked through the space barefoot, her body still sore, her hair always in a messy knot. And yet she had never looked more radiant. Sebastian moved through this new world like a man reborn. He was still awkward, still precise, but his precision now lived in small things. Warming bottles to the perfect temperature, folding tiny clothes with deliberate care, memorizing Hope's breathing patterns during naps. He barely touched his laptop. When he did, it was only after he had kissed both mother and daughter goodnight. One night, a week after Hope's birth, Clara found him standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, holding the baby in one arm, whispering something, so softly she couldn't hear. She watched him from the hallway, her heart aching with something that felt like peace. Later, when she joined him on the couch, Hope nestled between them, she said, "You love her." He nodded. Completely. And me? He turned to her. I don't know what I'd be without you. A few weeks later, as spring arrived with soft winds and blooming magnolias, Sebastian asked Clara to meet him on the rooftop. She found him standing by the garden wall where tiny white lights had been strung along the edge. Hope was in his arms, swaddled and sleeping, a pink bow resting gently on her head. Sebastian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. This time there's no contract, no offer, no deal, he said. Just a question. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple but beautiful, its band engraved with a single word. Hope. Will you marry me? He asked. Not for obligation, not for her, but because you're the only home I've ever wanted. Clara blinked, overwhelmed. Then she laughed through tears. That might be the worst proposal in history, he smiled, but it's real. Yes, she said and leaned forward to kiss him, her hand resting over Hope's small chest. 1,000 times yes. They married in a quiet ceremony by the water, surrounded by a few close friends and the gentle sound of the river in the background. Clara wore a soft cream dress. Sebastian wore his favorite grey suit. Hope giggled in her stroller as her parents exchanged vows, her chubby arms waving in the breeze. After the ceremony, they returned to the penthouse, which now felt nothing like the place Clara had once walked into, full of doubt and desperation. There was warmth here now, photographs framed on the walls, tiny socks drying by the windowsill, the smell of cinnamon and rosemary filling the kitchen. One evening, as Sebastian stood at the stove awkwardly stirring a pot of Clara's favorite soup, she came up behind him laughing. You're burning it, she said. I'm learning, he replied. You're trying. He turned to her, pulled her in gently and kissed her forehead. No, I'm staying. Hope cried from the other room, a tiny but powerful wail. Clara started to move, but Sebastian held up a hand. I've got her, he said, already walking away. She watched him go, heart full, eyes misty. This man, once so cold, so distant, now rocked their daughter with steady arms and whispered lullabies no one had taught him. It hadn't started with love. It hadn't even started with trust. But what they had now was built slowly, carefully, with mistakes and healing and small everyday choices. And in that quiet, imperfect work, something extraordinary had taken root. A family, real and raw and beautiful. And it all began with a proposition neither of them had truly understood until they learned how to love. Love isn't born from perfection. It grows in the cracks of our brokenness. Real connection demands vulnerability, honesty, and courage to confront the past. Let this remind us. Never underestimate the power of emotional intimacy over material security. Healing begins when we allow ourselves to be seen. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you believe in second chances, subscribe to our channel. Your support fuels us to create more heartfelt, powerful stories that speak to the soul. Let's grow together.